Greetings, scholars. It's Brian again. Just briefly, I want to talk about what you need to do for the editorial analysis speech. Now, we've already learned a lot about different types of claims, different types of values, different types of evidence. We're going to put all of these together in your editorial and try and analyze exactly what's going on. Now, we already started with step one of this process, which was breaking down the editorial. Now we're going to move on to putting it together a speech in which you tell all of the rest of our class what it is about the editorial and how it works. This process has only got a few main parts. There are a couple of examples up on Canvas that you can look at. I'm going to go over these very, very briefly. First of all, I want to say, for your editorial analysis speech, you have to use the terms of analysis that we have. If you do your entire speech and you never say, this was a claim of value, and I guarantee you've got at least one claim of value in your editorial, you're not going to do very well on this speech. You should be using terms like claim of fact, claim of value, claim of policy, because these are the terms, as argument scholars, we're trying to figure out. You should identify evidence by name and say, this was an example, this was a statistic, this was expert testimony. And finally, you ought to use what we just learned about values and say, this was a positive value that the New York Times used, this was a negative value. Those things and those terms are really, really crucial. Let me sum it up like this. You're not giving a speech about the topic of the editorial, you're giving a speech about the editorial. So we're argument scholars, we're learning advocacy. We want to know, what was the main claim? What type of claim was it? How did they support it? That's the key to doing really well in this particular speech. Now, the speech itself, it's got our regular parts. So we want you to start off doing an introduction. You should start an introduction with an attention getter. Again, audiences, they only listen to speakers for about 10 seconds before they decide whether it's worthwhile or not. You need an attention getter. You can use any technique that you want. A quote, rhetorical questions. Please don't start with a poll. That's not going to help you. Startling statistics. You can start with a joke, anything like that. Then you should state your thesis. And by the way, your thesis is not the same as the editorial's main claim. Your thesis has something to do with what you're going to say about the editorial. Something like, there were lots of claims of fact, or there was a lot of expert testimony presented, or I was surprised, all of this was instrumental values. Something like that's going to be your thesis. Then in your introduction, you should preview your main points. Now, when you go through the speech, you ought to have your main points and identify things from the actual editorial. I'd suggest trying to identify the main claim of the editorial at the beginning. Tell the audience what type of claim this is, then go through, quote it exactly from the editorial, then move on to discussing the subclaims. You can identify the subclaims of the editorial, tell what they are they fact, value, or policy, and then we want to know, how are those subclaims supported? Was there evidence? Was there statistics, expert testimony, examples used of those where there's a particular values? Now, the value is the hard part. We just learned that. It's really about word choice in the editorial. So look closely at the terms that the editorial is using and figure out what is it they're trying to convey. Now remember, we talked about this, with the editorial, they're really writing to a hostile audience. And you're not going to convince a hostile audience by just going up and telling them, this is what I think you should believe. People are going to bristle at that. They're not going to agree with that. So you have to ease that in. And that's one of the reasons why for many of you, you found the main claim at the end of your editorial, not at the beginning of the editorial like you would in a writing exposition form. No, when writing to a hostile audience, you want to put that claim at the end. The same thing for these values. An editorial board is never going to say, we think you should be more patriotic and here's why. That's not going to convince an audience that is hostile. They're not going to be able to sway public opinion with that. Instead, they're going to use words like heroic, national. They're going to use key terms that are going to try and convey that sense of value without actually coming out and saying it. We want to know about that as advocacy scholars. What are they trying to do? What are they actually accomplishing? Finally, your speech ought to have a conclusion. You should restate your thesis, review your main points, and do something to sum things up. If you can do all of that, talking about your editorial, you'll do great on this assignment. And it's a great opportunity for you to use analysis in advocacy. Good luck.